Hi everybody, this is Jamie from the Unlikely Homeschool. I've been mentioning on Facebook the fact that my husband was building me a children's library for my birthday, and it's finally finished, and as promised, I want to show it to you. But before I do, I just want to explain a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to share why I felt the need to build a children's library. I feel like it's my job to help my children build their affections towards books and to be able to filter everything through our Philippians grid. And yet when I take them to the public library, I can't just open my arms wide and say, have at it, it's a free-for-all, you can choose whatever book. Because quite frankly, so much of at least our public library is twaddle or doesn't stick with our faith values. I know in our library there's a whole section devoted to graphic novels, and there's a whole lot of zombie books that have sort of taken over our library. And while I think it's important for kids to be able to slowly start to learn how to choose the good amongst the twaddle, you have to teach them what is good first. And so I wanted to be able to have a place that they could come to where every single book on the shelf was a built-in yes, and they could slowly start developing their own literary palette and their own likenesses for books because everything on the shelf was available to them, and they could determine what genres they like. And so in building this children's library, I feel like I'm really giving my kids a chance to develop their own love for books. So that's kind of why I wanted to build the children's library. Before I show you what's in our library, I want to tell you what isn't. I did not put any of our field guides up here. It's a small little room in our attic, and I figured field guides, you want to have those really readily available and accessible, and so I left those downstairs in our living room so that when we see a bird or a squirrel or something scooch past our living room window, we have those ready and we can look them up. I don't have any of the children's Bibles or their devotional resources that they're currently using because we have those in the place in a basket downstairs where they can just dig through those first thing in the morning. I also don't have any curriculum items like curriculum, teacher's editions, those types of things, or any books that we're currently using for certain units that we're working through. So for instance, we're doing an oceanography study this semester and a human anatomy study next semester, so I have all of those books taken out. But for the most part, all of the books that I have in my home that would appeal to a child are here upstairs in a little attic room devoted for nothing but a children's library. So I divided my library into two sections. I have a fiction section and a nonfiction section. And the nonfiction section, there is some rhyme and reason to it, but it's a little bit more hodgepodge because I didn't order them through like the Dewey Decimal System or anything like that. But I just wanted to give you a quick tour, show you how I organize them, and then also show you how I'm going to help my children and encourage them to keep the books organized so that we can find them easily. On the top shelf, you'll see that I have a bunch of Usborne books for the most part, and these are just sort of kids' interesting topics. I wanted to keep the series together, so I kept those on a little shelf. Below that, I have all of our history themed books in chronological order. I've also created a presidents and capital section, and again, I kept our Cornerstones of Freedom books together because I like to keep the set together. Below that, I have some miniature biographies. And then because I live in an old house and because the floors and the ceilings are not exactly even or plain, my husband had some difficulty with designing the shelves. They're not all the same height or the same length. And actually there's, a giant pole in the back here that he had to work around. So with that in mind, I had to get a little bit creative and think outside the box on how I organize things. So when all my best laid plans came together, I had to tweak it a little bit just because the books wouldn't fit the way I wanted them to. So I do have an oversized shelf here for all of our atlases and then some of our nonfiction books that are oversized. And it's not ideal to have them laying flat like that, but it works. Underneath that are more biographies, and some of our reference materials are stacked up here. Beyond that, I have our Bible materials, children's Bibles and hymn studies and missionary stories. Below that is more of the science section. So I have some geography to start with, which I suppose isn't science, but that starts the shelf out. And then I've divided science into the typical sections, life science, biology would include that, physical science, some chemistry, that kind of thing. At the very back are some of our science activity and project books. And then I actually did skip over this section. This is a small little portion that's a little bit hodgepodge, but it has all of our art things, art books like music and art study and project-oriented books. Below that is where my little guy usually hangs out, and I have some of our picture books. I have a basket of picture books for him to flip through, and those aren't really in any particular order because, let's face it, he's 3, and I don't really expect him to be able to put them back in order. And next to that are some board books and then children's magazines. So that's the nonfiction side, and then past the window seat is the other side, the fiction side. And I have a little step stool for my shorter guys to be able to climb up and get the books they want. The fiction is a little bit more organized than the nonfiction. I start up here with just our fiction novels. They're mostly middle grade fiction, and I have alphabetized them according to the author's last name, and that goes through the first 2 shelves. In this larger or taller shelf, I have some more of our anthologies, children's treasury, literature collections. They were a bit taller, so they needed a taller shelf. I put some of our oversized fiction over here just because they simply wouldn't fit. They were just too tall. Below that, I've sectioned out a space for classics, and I could have woven those in with the regular fiction, but sometimes I assign my kids to specifically read a classic, and I figure in putting those aside and giving them their own separate shelf, it would be easier for my kids to really begin to learn what constitutes a classic and begin to become familiar with some of the classic titles. Beyond that, I have some of our readers, and these are just commercial readers. I have a lot of Bob books and Abeka readers that I have in a separate place, but these are just the commercial readers that you would find at Walmart or Target, and I have those in order according to how they are leveled, 1, 2, or 3. And then starts our historical fiction. Now this gets a little tricky because I have a lot of different sets or series, and I wanted to keep the sets together. So while it would be ideal to organize them all historically and chronologically, I did want to keep the sets. So I did organize them chronologically, and they go all the way down here through the whole other shelf, but I kept the sets together, but within the set, they are in chronological order. Below that are 2 more baskets of picture books for my little guy to sift through. So that is a basic tour of the library shelves, and now let me show you how I'm encouraging my children to keep the organization as is. I didn't want to spend a weekend organizing all of the books only to find them in a hodgepodge disarray within a few days. Prior to having this library, I should let you know that most of our books were just in plastic tub bins down in our basement, and we'd have to go digging through them. And let's face it, having books in a plastic bin really doesn't cultivate a love for wanting to read, quite like seeing them all laid out on a shelf. So as the old saying goes, if you build it, they will come. Just having the books laid out for my kids to see has really inspired them to sit and read for hours and hours up here in the library. And just having a designated space, I'm putting priority and giving prominence to the very idea of reading and why it should be important to us. Okay, so here's how we keep them organized. If you're a frequent reader of my blog, you know that I color coordinate my kids and assign them all a color. I will provide a link for that information within this post. So go to theunlikelyhomeschool.com and I'll have a link in the show notes for this video. But each of my kids have a color. My husband and I have one as well. I went to Walmart and just got some basic stir sticks for paint and just globbed a little bit of color on the end of it in each of our colors. And everybody in my family has 2 sticks. And then I've also made a couple additional sticks for visitors. So if you would like to come to my library and take a book off the shelf and take it somewhere else in the house or maybe to your own house, what you would do is you would grab a stir stick in that red color, find the book that you would like to read. I want to read this Boxcar Children book. I stick the stir stick into the spot next to the book. I can pull the book out and leave the stick there. And then I can take the book home and read it, or downstairs to my bedroom and read it. And when I'm done, I put the book back in next to the stir stick, and remove the stick, and all the books, in theory, should stay in their same order. And it's been about a week since we started this, and so far all the books have been returned and in their proper place. I know that we're only in the honeymoon stage, so I expect to have to come up here and reorganize and order, but I feel like this is giving my kids a chance to be independent and responsible and to keep things in the way they've already been ordered. So thanks for taking a tour of my library. Happy homeschooling.